Before we begin, leave a comment telling us where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. We like knowing how far these stories travel and what hour of the night carries them best. In the autumn of 1891, 31 men rode into a narrow fold of the Colorado Rockies to work a newly staked silver claim. The camp they built was called Stillwater Gulch, named for the strange, glass-still creek that ran through it, a creek that, according to at least 4 separate journals recovered decades later, never once froze, not even in temperatures that dropped to 30 below. By the following spring, only 8 of those men were alive to walk out of the mountains. No bodies were ever recovered. No collapse, avalanche, or massacre was ever documented. The 8 survivors gave testimonies so contradictory that the Territorial Mining Commission closed its inquiry within a year, filing the matter under causes indeterminate, presumed exposure and desertion. The claim was abandoned. The maps were redrawn. Stillwater Gulch does not appear under that name on any survey after 1897. This is a reconstruction of what happened there, built from mining company ledgers, personal correspondence, a folklorist's field notes from 1974, and testimony that surfaced only when the people giving it believed no one left alive would ever hear it. Cedar Hollow, Colorado, in the autumn of 1891, was barely a town, a say office, a livery, a chapel that doubled as a schoolhouse, and a saloon that did more business than all 3 combined. It existed because the mountains around it occasionally gave up silver, and men were willing to go a very long way into those mountains to find it. Elias Cordero was one of those men. 46 years old, originally from a mining family in Sonora, he'd spent 2 decades running claims across the territory with a reputation nobody disputed. Cordero brought his crews back. Not always rich, but back. The Cedar Hollow Sentinel, September 1891, carries his advertisement. Men wanted for winter claim work. Experienced hands only. Fair shares, honest count. Inquire Cordero at the livery. Company payroll records, later recovered from the mining office in Denver, list 31 names selected from roughly 60 applicants. Most had worked with Cordero before or came vouched for by men who had. A handful were strangers to the territory, drifters with useful trades, a surveyor fresh out of the East, 2 brothers who'd walked in from Wyoming with nothing but a mule and a letter of introduction. October 2nd, 1891. The party left Cedar Hollow, 31 men, 6 wagons, provisions rated for 8 months. Cordero's ledger, recovered along with his personal journal, notes the route, up the Alverson Trail, across Miller's Pass, then off any marked trail entirely, following a tributary the Ute guides who'd once worked with Cordero called, in rough translation, the water that does not sleep. They reached the site on October 14th. Cordero's journal describes it with the flat satisfaction of a man who has found exactly what he was looking for: good ground. Timber close. Water year-round by the look of it, though I don't like how still it sits. No current I can find, yet it doesn't skin over even at night. Caro says it's spring-fed from below, warm enough to hold off ice. Good enough reason as any. They built fast. Within 3 weeks, a bunkhouse, a mess hall, a smithy, a powder shed set well back from the rest, and the beginnings of the shaft itself, driven into a granite face on the gulch's north wall. Cordero's entries through late October and most of November are almost tediously ordinary. Or yields. Weather. A dispute over cards between 2 men named Vas and Delgado settled with nothing worse than bruised knuckles. A wolf pack heard but never seen. Routine. On November 19th, he writes the first line that, in hindsight, nobody in that camp should have let pass without comment. Boone says the shaft goes deeper than we're digging. Says he can hear it, a hollowness under the hollowness, if that makes any sense on paper. Told him rock the strange things underground. He didn't look convinced. Neither, if I'm honest, did I. For 3 more weeks, nothing worsened. Or came out steady. A supply run was planned for early December. 2 men, Vas and a quiet Kansa named Absalom Reyes, were to ride out with the first shipment and bring back mail, tools, and word from Cedar Hollow. They never made that ride. December 1st, Cordero's journal. Reyes reports voices from the shaft during the night watch. Says they're beneath the sound of picks, under the drip of water, like men talking 2 rooms away through a wall. Told him to get more sleep. He didn't argue, but he didn't sleep either, not by the look of him this morning. December 3rd, Boone and Whitfield both report the sound now. Independent of each other, before either heard the other's account, which unsettles me more than I'd like to admit. Both describe it the same way, a murmur, wordless, that seems to come from no particular direction in the shaft, as though the rock itself were the source. December 5th, Delgado failed to return from the evening shift. Search of the shaft found his lamp, still lit, 40 yards past where he'd been assigned to work, ground he had no cause to be digging. No sign of Delgado. 2 marks in the wall beyond that point that are not ours. Something had been digging from the other side. This is the line, digging from the other side, that Cordero never elaborates on again in any surviving page of the journal. Whether he meant it literally, whether he retracted the thought, whether the censor was his own hand or something that came later, isn't known. The next several entries are businesslike to the point of denial, as though writing about anything else might keep the sentence from being true. December 8th, Whitfield gone. Last seen at the mouth of the shaft near dusk, claimed to have heard Delgado's voice from inside, calling for help. Went in alone against direct order. Corder and Marsh searched 2 hours by lamplight. Found Whitfield's boot prints ending, not trailing off, not turning back, ending 40 feet short of the working face, in open tunnel with no side passage, no fall, no water. The print simply stopped. December 11th, Marsh missing this morning. No struggle in his bunk. His boots still by the door. Cordero doubled the watch. He forbade anyone from entering the shaft alone. He began, for the first time, locking the powder shed at night. Not against theft, his journal clarifies, but because I no longer trust what any man among us might do if the voices call his own name instead of a dead man's. They had not yet realized the voices would. The turn, the point past which nothing in Cordero's account resembles an ordinary account of hardship, comes on December 17th, in an entry longer than any before it. Cardo woke the bunkhouse near 2 in the morning, insisting he'd heard his wife calling from outside. His wife has been 11 years dead. He knew this. He said it changed nothing about the certainty of the voice, that it was her cadence exactly, her particular way of drawing out his name, a thing no stranger could counterfeit and no man in this camp had ever heard him describe. He was halfway to the door before 3 of us dragged him back. I record this not because I believe a dead woman called from the tree line, but because within the hour, 2 more men reported the same, voices of people they had lost, people who had no possible connection to Stillwater Gulch, calling from the dark beyond the firelight in tones exact enough to unmake a grown man's composure entirely. I do not know what we have opened. I only know that whatever is beneath that shaft has learned, with unnerving speed, exactly which voice will make each of us walk toward it. A fragment of a second document survives from this period, a letter, never sent, found among the effects of a young surveyor named Peter Aldrich when the survivors eventually returned to Cedar Hollow. Undated, but internally placed in mid-December by its references. Dearest Ruth, I do not know if you will ever read this, and some nights I hope you won't, because it would mean I found a way to burn it before anyone thought to send it on. There is something under this mountain that knows things it has no right to know. It called Boone by a childhood name his own mother stopped using 30 years back. It called me by yours. Not shouted, spoken, soft, the way you say it when you're half asleep beside me. I did not go to it. I want you to know that above anything else in this letter, I did not go. But I understood, hearing it, exactly why the others did. By December 20th, according to Cordero, the camp had lost 11 men. By December 27th, 17. The survivors had stopped sleeping at individual bunks and were gathering, all of them, in the mess hall through the night, a decision Cordero notes with something close to shame, as though communal fear were itself a kind of surrender. The entries between December 28th and January 9th are missing from the recovered journal, not lost, but removed, the stubs of torn pages still visible in the binding when the book was finally examined by archivists in 1975. What resumes on January 10th is written in a hand markedly different from Cordero's earlier, careful script, hurried, pressed hard enough to tear the paper in places. 8 of us. 8 of 31. We leave at first light, whatever the weather. We are burning what we cannot carry, and I have ordered the shaft's entrance packed with what powder remains and collapsed, though I do not believe collapsing stone stops a thing that was already inside the mountain before we arrived. We tell each other we will make Cedar Hollow within 10 days. We tell each other a great many things. None of us, I think, quite believe any of them anymore. Cordero's journal ends there. What fills in the gap, the 11 days between December 20th and the collapse of the shaft, comes from a second, far more detailed source, a sealed manuscript left by Peter Aldrich, the young surveyor, discovered among his belongings only after his death in 1947, addressed to no one, marked simply burn unread. His son did not burn it. He gave it, decades later, to a university folklorist researching frontier disappearances, a decision that would prove costly to nearly everyone who came after him. Aldrich's account begins with the discovery that Cordero's journal only alludes to. It was Boone, he writes, who found a second shaft, not the one they had dug, but an older one, its mouth choked with rubble that had clearly fallen naturally, decades or centuries before any of them arrived. Behind that rubble, once cleared, ran a passage none of them had cut. The walls bore marks. Not or veins, not tool scarring, cut lines, deliberate, in patterns that resembled no alphabet any of us knew, arranged with a precision that felt less like art than like instruction. Fenwick, who had some schooling in geometry, said the angles repeated according to a ratio he couldn't place, and that looking at them too long gave him the same vertigo as staring down a stairwell. Deep in that passage, the party found a chamber, larger, Aldrich writes, than seemed geologically possible given the modest footprint of the mountain above it. At its center stood a shape he struggles, even in private writing meant for no eyes but his own, to properly describe, an arch of black stone, standing free of any wall, open on both sides to what should have been more chamber and was instead nothing. Not darkness. Absence. Voss went closest. He did not mean to test it. I want that understood, whoever eventually reads this, if anyone does. He was examining the base of the arch, tracing the carved lines with his fingers, explaining to Carter what he thought the pattern might represent. He took one step back to get a better angle. That step carried him through the frame. He did not fall. He did not cry out. There was no flash, no sound at all beyond the ordinary drip of the cave. One moment he stood at the edge of our lamplight, mid-sentence. The next, the space where he had been standing held nothing but the sound of his voice, still finishing the word he'd been saying, coming from no mouth any of us could see. The shaft was sealed the same day. It did not matter. Aldrich describes the following weeks in fragments, men taken singly, in moments of ordinary solitude, always without struggle or sound. And then, worse, the voices, calling from the tree line each night in the cadence of the missing, and eventually, the shapes. They stood at the edge of where our fire could reach, no closer, for the better part of a week before anyone but Carter would admit aloud to seeing them. They wore the faces of the men we had lost, Vasa's face, Delgado's, Marsh's, worn correctly enough, at a distance, in poor light, to nearly convince the eye. But nothing about the way they stood was correct. They did not shift their weight. They did not shiver, though the temperature that week fell past 20 below. And when the fire caught their eyes just right, there was no color in them at all, only a black that seemed to keep going, the way a well keeps going past where the light can follow. The final passage of Aldrich's manuscript, dated only our last night, describes the decision to run, 8 men, splitting apart deliberately rather than traveling as a group, on Cordero's theory that whatever hunted them hunted best when it could isolate a single voice from the noise of the others. We agreed to say nothing of the shaft, the arch, or what waited beyond it, to anyone, for as long as we lived. Cordero said that speaking it aloud might be a kind of invitation. That silence was the only door we had left that we could still choose to keep shut. I do not know if he was right. I know only that 8 of us kept that silence for the whole of our lives, and it did not save even one of us from what came after. The 8 survivors reached Cedar Hollow separately over the course of a single day in late January 1892, arriving hours apart with no arrangement between them. The Sentinel's account from that week describes men altered beyond what hardship alone accounts for, flinching at ordinary sounds, refusing to meet a questioner's eye, giving accounts of their winter so at odds with one another that the sheriff's office suspected concealment before it suspected tragedy. Sheriff Amos Rourke's report to the territorial office survives in the county archive. The men's stories do not agree on the manner of the deaths, nor even reliably on the number, though all concur that 23 of their party did not return. I find no physical evidence of foul play among the survivors, and their evident distress argues strongly against it. I recommend medical rather than legal attention. The camp doctor who examined them, a man named Whitcomb, left notes describing symptoms consistent across all 8: insomnia, an extreme aversion to darkness, and, most consistently, an identical recurring nightmare, described independently by each man, of being called by name from just beyond a firelit clearing by a voice they loved and could not refuse. A recovery party sent out that spring, guided by 2 of the survivors, failed entirely to relocate the camp, both guides growing disoriented in terrain the Sentinel noted they had, only months before, known intimately. A second, larger expedition that summer succeeded where the first had failed, finding the burned remains of the bunkhouse and mess hall exactly where Cordero's final journal entry described. They found no bodies, no personal effects, no sign of the shaft at all. Its entrance, according to the survey team's report, appeared to have suffered a natural rockfall consistent with the passage of several years, not several months. Of the 8 survivors, 6 were dead within 3 years, most by their own hand or under circumstances the coroners of the time declined to examine closely. Elias Cordero shot himself in 1893, leaving no note beyond the sealed journal, which he had instructed be held unopened in the mining company's records for 50 years. Peter Aldred outlived them all, dying quietly in 1947, having spent the second half of his life, according to his son, refusing ever again to sleep with the lamps out. The matter might have stayed buried in a company archive indefinitely had it not been for Dr. Helen Marchetti, a folklore researcher at a regional university, who encountered Cordero's journal in 1974 while cataloging donated mining company records for an entirely unrelated project on frontier labor conditions. Her field notes, preserved, unlike much of what followed, in an ordinary university archive, describe a growing and eventually consuming fixation. She tracked down county death records, church registers, and, most significantly, the descendants of all 8 survivors, several of whom were still living. The pattern she found unsettled even her academic colleagues. Grandchildren of the survivors described near-identical family stories, passed down without any of them realizing the others existed, locked doors, lamps kept burning through the night, and an old man in the family who would sometimes stare at nothing and murmur a name that belonged to no one currently in the room. Marchetti's notes also record something Aldrich's manuscript never fully addressed. In the year following the incident, at least 9 strangers appeared in settlements across the territory, men with no prior history in the region, unable or unwilling to account for themselves, noted in local records for a shared and specific stillness. One took work as a barber in a town 40 miles east and was remembered, in a customer's letter preserved by a local historical society, for a habit of forgetting, mid-shave, to blink. Another taught briefly at a rural schoolhouse before parents petitioned to have him removed over children's reports of nightmares. Each, eventually, vanished from the record entirely. No death, no departure, simply an absence where a name had briefly been. Marchetti's research advisor, in a letter recommending she take leave from the project, wrote with evident concern that she had begun speaking of the incident as though it were current rather than historical, and that she had taken to sleeping with every light in her apartment lit. In June of 1976, Marchetti wrote to a colleague that she had located, through survey records and interviews with elderly locals, coordinates she believed matched the original camp, and intended to confirm it in person before continuing her research further. She did not return from that trip. A search located her abandoned camp 3 weeks later, her research materials intact and undisturbed beside it. Dr. Helen Marchetti herself was never found. Reports from the region since have never fully stopped, though they've never coalesced into anything a park service or a police department could act on. A geological survey conducted in the 1980s in the area now folded into a stretch of protected national forest land noted, almost in passing, anomalous acoustic reflection in this sector, producing an impression of voices where instrumentation records none. Recommend acoustic follow-up. No follow-up was ever logged as completed. Forest rangers assigned to that district have, across several decades, requested transfer at rates colleagues describe as unusual, several citing, off the record, the same complaint, voices, at dusk, calling names the ranger hadn't spoken aloud to anyone nearby. In 2003, hikers reported passing a man in visibly antique mining clothing standing motionless at a stream crossing well off any marked trail, who identified himself, when asked, by a name that, had the hikers thought to check, which they had no reason to, matched exactly one of the 23 men who never walked out of Stillwater Gulch in the winter of 1892. In 2016, a small independent research team investigating regional mining ghost towns for an online documentary series located what they believed to be cabin foundations matching Cordero's described site. Their final transmission to their production office, sent the evening before a planned final scouting trip, read only, "Think we found the real location." Something else here too, not on any map. Going to check it at first light. No further contact was received. Search efforts recovered an undisturbed vehicle at a trailhead. Nothing else.
What happened at Stillwater Gulch in the winter of 1891 has no tidy ending, and perhaps that is the truest thing that can be said of it. 23 men entered a mountain and did not come back out of it in any way that could be accounted for, mourned, or buried. 8 men carried a silence out with them that cost most of them their lives regardless, a silence their descendants have gone on inheriting without ever quite knowing what it was they were keeping. Aldrich's manuscript ends with a single line, written, his son believed, only days before his death, the last thing in his own hand on the subject he had spent 56 years refusing to speak of aloud. If a voice you love calls to you from somewhere it has no reason to be, do not answer it. Whatever answers back in its place has had a very long time to learn how. The mountain is still there. The creek, if you could find it, likely still doesn't freeze. And somewhere in that fold of rock, a door that 8 frightened men once tried to close behind them may still, by every account since, be standing open.